For years, whispers traveled quietly through church halls, social media pages, and gossip threads. Rumors that no one dared speak aloud, stories half heard, half guessed until one man finally broke the silence. Pastor Joe Eggboo, a respected pastor who had spent years in the shadow of one of gospel music's brightest stars, decided to speak. And when he did, what he revealed not only answered questions, but also sparked a storm of new ones that shook the gospel world to its core. Everyone knew the name Sinach. Her voice had become a global anthem. Waymaker wasn't just a hit, was a song that defined hope, faith, and worship. From massive churches in America to small gatherings across Asia, her music moved hearts. On stage, she radiated light and power. Offstage, though, there was a silence that led many to wonder about the life she shared with her husband, Pastor Joe Eggboo. For decades, fans had asked the same questions. Why was Pastor Joe rarely seen beside Sinach during her biggest moments? Why was he missing from interviews, award shows, and social media celebrations? Some said he was a private man. Others whispered that tension existed behind the scenes. Every time someone asked, Sinach smiled softly and said she preferred to keep her marriage private. But her silence only fueled curiosity. As years passed, Pastor Joe's absence from the public eye became more pronounced. No photos, no messages celebrating his wife's achievements, no interviews. In a world where couples shared every detail online, his disappearance sparked more speculation. People wondered, was he struggling? Was there more behind the scenes than anyone knew? Meanwhile, social media erupted with theories. Some claimed Pastor Joe was jealous of Sinach's fame. Others suggested he had stepped back from ministry entirely. Even close friends refused to comment, leaving the mystery unsolved. Questions multiplied. Was he controlling? Was he hurt? Or was he simply trying to stay out of the spotlight? Then came the turning point. In a quiet men's ministry gathering in Lagos, a single question changed everything. How do we lead when our wives are the ones leading nations in worship? Someone asked. All eyes turned to Pastor Joe. For the first time, he opened up. He spoke of the struggle of standing beside a global icon, the feelings of invisibility, and the moments when he almost gave up on ministry. He spoke of pain, honesty, and a truth that no one saw coming. And though he didn't yell or argue, his words were powerful enough to start a conversation that would sweep across WhatsApp, YouTube, and social media in hours. In the silence that followed, the gospel world waited for a response. And when Sinach finally spoke, she didn't use words, she used worship. Tears streamed down her face as she sang a song that expressed everything she couldn't say in interviews. Her subtle social media gestures, a wedding photo, a follow on Instagram, a scripture post spoke volumes. The couple, it seemed, was telling the world through honesty, faith, and grace. Even storms can be endured. And yet, this was only the beginning. Their story, once a quiet rumor, had now become a global conversation about love, faith, and the challenges of standing together under the spotlight, asterisk after pastor. Joe's quiet confession at the men's ministry gathering, the world erupted with speculation. Social media pages lit up, WhatsApp groups buzzed, and gospel blogs dissected every word. Some called him brave for sharing his feelings of invisibility. Others accused him of trying to regain attention. Opinions clashed like fire, and through it all, Pastor Joe remained silent again, letting his words from that gathering speak for themselves. For years, standing behind Sinach had not been easy. She was a global icon, traveling across continents, leading thousands in worship, and receiving awards that made headlines worldwide. Meanwhile, Joe was often invisible to the public eye. Friends and family knew the truth. He wasn't absent because he didn't care. He was quietly carrying the weight of his own ministry, his own expectations, and the constant comparison to his wife's fame. Joe admitted that at times he felt overlooked, defined only as Sinach's husband. He shared how the silence that he maintained to protect their privacy had cost him more than he ever imagined. The pressure of watching someone you love touch millions of lives while you remain largely unseen created a storm of emotions: pride, insecurity, humility, and sometimes even despair. Yet, through it all, his faith and commitment to God anchored him. Fans had often wondered why he wasn't on stage beside her, why he didn't post messages of support online. Some accused him of jealousy or insecurity. Yet those who knew him understood that Pastor Joe was not competing with Sinach. He was simply navigating the complex challenges of marriage under the global spotlight. He was learning slowly what it meant to love someone whose calling was larger than the average stage or city. Then came the first real public response from Sinach, and it was unlike anything anyone expected. She didn't give a press release or an interview. She didn't write a long caption on social media explaining herself. Instead, she went to the stage, tears in her eyes, and sang. The song was filled with emotion, every word carrying the weight of unspoken truths, every note resonating with the depth of her heart. It was her way of responding not with words, but with worship. Fans and church members who witnessed that night were left speechless. Some cried openly, others recorded the moment, and almost everyone felt the intensity of her response. Lines like, "Even in my weakness, you are strong for me," were understood as messages to God and, quietly, to Pastor Joe as well. It was a public display of support without ever having to speak about the controversy in words. Social media reacted immediately. Every gesture, from Sinach the wedding photo she shared, the subtle follow on Instagram, the scripture from Isaiah 43 to Tubi, came a topic of discussion. People read deep meaning into small acts, interpreting them as signs of reconciliation, love, and silent forgiveness. While the world debated what it all meant, those closest to the couple knew that this was not about fame or image. This was about healing, understanding, and protecting their marriage from public speculation. Through all of this, a pattern began to emerge. Joe and Sinach were showing the world that love, faith, and grace can overcome even the most intense scrutiny. The narrative was shifting from gossip to testimony. Fans began to reflect, perhaps silence isn't weakness. Perhaps patience, faith, and careful honesty carry their own kind of power. Behind the scenes, the couple took deliberate steps toward healing. They attended private counseling sessions with a trusted senior pastor who had known them long before fame touched their lives. These sessions were intimate and raw, filled with tears, prayers, and deep honesty. Joe admitted, "We both lost ourselves trying to protect each other from the world." Sinach replied simply, "Maybe that's how God teaches us to love again through the breaking." As the weeks passed, they began appearing together more frequently, but not as the picture-perfect couple the public imagined. Instead, they were two imperfect people, surviving the storms of fame, misunderstanding, and human vulnerability. Every public appearance, every small gesture of togetherness, spoke louder than any statement they could have issued. And then came their first major public moment post-confession, a small gospel conference in Abuja, when Joe and Sinach walked in holding hands. The room paused, silence spreading across the crowd. But that silence quickly gave way to applause, not for fame or glory, but for grace and resilience. Joe smiled humbly. Sinach whispered something that made him laugh. And for the first time in years, the public witnessed the strength of a marriage tested but not broken. After the Abuja conference, it became clear that something had changed between Pastor Joe and Sinach. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a flashy announcement. It was the quiet strength of two people choosing to walk through life together, side by side. Their smiles, gestures, and simple acts of togetherness said more than any social media post could. The couple continued attending private counseling sessions, learning to communicate openly about the struggles they had long kept hidden. Pastor Joe shared how years of watching Sinach succeed while feeling invisible had created a quiet storm within him. He admitted moments of doubt, frustration, and even despair. Yet, in those moments, he realized that his calling wasn't about fame, was about faithfulness. Sinach, in turn, expressed how much she valued his support, even if it hadn't been visible to the public. Together, they began rebuilding trust, understanding, and love. Their private healing slowly translated into public steps of unity. Sinach started joining Joe in subtle ways during her ministry travels. She ensured that their moments together, though not always photographed or broadcast, were intentional and visible to those who mattered most. Meanwhile, Joe embraced his role with a renewed sense of purpose, praying alongside her, offering guidance to couples in ministry, and reclaiming his voice as a pastor. In a world that had long judged their silence, Joe and Sinach became a living example of grace and resilience. Their story inspired countless couples facing similar pressures, especially those in ministry, where fame, expectation, and scrutiny often test the bonds of marriage. Slowly, people began to see that what looked like absence or withdrawal had been a season of preparation, reflection, and growth. One of the most moving moments came during a worship night. Weeks after their Egbu appearance, Sinach took the stage, her voice trembling with raw emotion, as she sang a song that would later be titled Stronger Together. The lyrics spoke of endurance, faith, and the refining power of love. We've walked through fire, but faith made us whole. Love never lost, just refined in the soul. Joe stood beside her, quietly praying, holding his Bible. At Sita, husband and wife, imperfect but united, facing the crowd with humility and grace, moved thousands. It was no longer about headlines or rumors. It was about a testimony of restoration. Fans called it a healing moment, a chance to witness the power of forgiveness, faith, and shared purpose. Social media reacted differently this time. The story no longer sparked debate over jealousy or control. Instead, it became a lesson in endurance, grace, and partnership. Pastors, gospel leaders, and ordinary couples began sharing sermons and posts inspired by their journey. Their struggles had transformed into a blueprint for others. Navigating the pressures of public life and ministry, even subtle actions carried meaning. Sinach continued to post short glimpses of their life together, a throwback wedding photo, a verse from Isaiah 43:2, and quiet acknowledgments of their shared journey. Each post was carefully observed by fans, who interpreted them as symbols of forgiveness, support, and steadfast faith. Through it all, Pastor Joe and Sinach never sought to justify themselves or their marriage. They didn't argue publicly, nor did they attempt to explain every rumor. Instead, they lived their truth. They chose prayer over protest, faith over fear, and humility over pride. This quiet, steadfast approach began to shift the conversation entirely soon. They decided to take their lessons one step further. Recognizing the need for guidance among couples in ministry, they launched a joint initiative to mentor and counsel other pastors and their spouses. Their goal was simple: to help couples navigate the pressures of public life, fame, and ministry with grace and resilience. What had once been a deeply personal struggle became a source of purpose for thousands. By this point, the narrative had completely changed. Where once people had whispered about jealousy, absence, and tension, they now spoke of endurance, partnership, and faith in action. The story of Pastor Joe and Sinach was no longer a tale of secrecy, and rumor it was a testimony of transformation. Their marriage, once tested by fame and silence, had become a symbol of hope. And even though the world had watched every subtle gesture, social media post, and public appearance, the most important changes were happening behind the scenes. Through tears, prayer, and honest conversation, they were rebuilding not just their marriage, but their ministry, their influence, and their shared purpose. As months passed, Pastor Joe and Sinach's story continued to inspire the gospel community and beyond. What had started as rumors, gossip, and speculation became a living testimony of endurance, humility, and faith. Their marriage, tested by fame, silence, and misunderstanding, had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Their joint ministry flourished. The couple traveled together to mentor pastors and spouses, sharing lessons learned from their own journey. They spoke openly about the pressures of fame, the weight of public expectation, and the importance of honest communication in marriage. Couples in ministry found in them a model of grace under scrutiny, proof that a marriage can survive even the harshest public storms. If rooted in faith and understanding, public appearances became opportunities not for show, but for testimony. At each event, Joe and Sinach demonstrated partnership and humility. They no longer measured their success by applause or recognition, but by the lives they touched and the marriages they helped heal. Fans began to realize that true love isn't always visible in headlines. It's built quietly through patience, prayer, and unwavering commitment. One of the most profound moments came during a special worship night. Sinach took the stage with tears in her eyes and began a new song titled Stronger Together. The lyrics were raw, honest, and full of hope. We've walked through fire, but faith made us whole. Love never lost, just refined in the soul. Pastor Joe stood beside her, quietly praying, holding his Bible. The audience was silent, moved by the sight of a couple who had survived storms that few could imagine. In that moment, fans understood that this was more than music or performance. It was a living demonstration of resilience, faith, and mutual support. Social media, which had once thrived on gossip and speculation, now shared messages of encouragement, admiration, and hope. Hashtags like #StrongerTogether and #FaithInAction trended as fans celebrated the couple's courage and honesty. Gospel leaders began preaching about humility, endurance, and grace, using Joe and Sinach's journey as a prime example. Their story became a teaching moment for communities worldwide. Behind the scenes, the couple continued their private healing. Counseling, prayer, and honest conversations remained central to their relationship. Joe admitted, "The world saw our silence as distance, but God used it as preparation." Sinach responded, "Through the breaking, God teaches us to love again. And now, we walk together, stronger than before." Their reconciliation also carried subtle public reminders. Wedding photos resurfaced on social media. Short clips of worship nights highlighted their unity, and scripture posts quietly communicated resilience and faith. Fans interpreted these gestures as evidence that true love and commitment had triumphed, even in the face of misunderstanding and public scrutiny. The transformation of their story from rumor and speculation to testimony and inspiration also reshaped the gospel community's perspective. Couples began asking themselves difficult questions. Can a marriage survive fame and expectation? Can silence sometimes be a form of strength? The answer, Joe and Sinach demonstrated, was yes if it's guided by faith, humility, and mutual respect. In time, Pastor Joe and Sinach's marriage became more than a personal journey. It became a movement. Their joint ministry grew to support couples in ministry worldwide, offering guidance, mentorship, and hope to those navigating fame, pressure, and public life. They showed that struggles do not define a marriage. How couples respond to them does. The ultimate lesson their story delivered was clear. Silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it is a quiet strength, a period of preparation, and a demonstration of faith in action. When the right time comes, speaking the truth with honesty, humility, and love can transform lives, heal hearts, and inspire communities. By the time the controversy and rumors faded, what remained was a legacy of restoration. Pastor Joe and Sinach weren't just rebuilding their marriage, they were building a testimony for the world. Their love, grounded in faith and grace, became a beacon of hope, showing that even in the darkest chapters, love guided by God can find its way home. The story that began with whispers and curiosity closed with worship, honesty, and unity. Destiny had tested them. The world had doubted them. But through patience, faith, and unwavering commitment, they proved that grace always prevails and that love, strengthened by trials, leaves a lasting mark on hearts and communities alike.